Your white phosphorus dual tubes aren't going to show you that tiny little cactus that's going to poke you in the leg and make you scream like a girl and give the position away.
Hey guys, this is the Hard Time Strongman podcast, cheering up a bear class of man, and today we are joined by our special guest, Bush Plaid. Bush Plaid, welcome on, man. Great to have you here.
Hey, thanks guys for having me come on.
Thanks for coming on. Good to have you. So, we've been talking for, a couple of months now, trying to get you on the show, having a hard time trying to figure out what to talk about with you, just because, looking through your content, your YouTube, your IG, you cover just such a broad range of stuff. You cover history, you cover fieldcraft, every now and then we see you sprinkle in, about being a family man. And I just, that's where, I, have a lot of interest, just because, being a father too, it's a big passion of mine to raise up my, my boys as young men in this, as I'm supposed to, and getting my, wife on the same page with trying to make our family more, I guess more focused on lasting, living how we're, traditionally how people have lived, and, bringing community together. So,
yeah,
that to say, it's great to have you on, man. I'm really excited for the conversation and where it's going to go. So for the guys who don't know who you are, you're Bush Plaid, you're on IG, you're on YouTube. I saw you have a website. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and, what your goals are and what you try to do?
Yeah. So, I'm a Navy vet. My wife and I met in the Navy together. She stayed in, I got out. I went and did some contracting for the Department of Navy for 18 months. And then when her maternity leave was done for our first kiddo, I quit and I became a stay-at-home dad. And I basically have been a stay-at-home dad. I say on and off because I have worked some jobs in between, but I've always ended up leaving the job to go back to being a stay-at-home dad, because she's, up until recently, been pursuing a career in the military. She went from the Navy to the Army. Army sucks. Her command is...
Naturally.
Her command is...
Can confirm.
It has a lot to be desired, and so she's done. So for the last almost a decade, I've just been a stay-at-home dad and on and off. I did some security gigs when she was a student at an actual college, because she just finished her bachelor's this spring but she was actually a student at a college for a full year. I was a security officer, so she went to school, I worked at the school, kids were at daycare. We'd get done, we'd pick them up, and it was kind of just it was the only time in our whole existence where it was just very, I wouldn't say white picket, because we were in rural Maine, so it was a lot of white snow. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. So, and in all of that, I've constantly, shooting / firearms, fieldcraft / bushcraft, and just outdoorsman, woodsman type things. I mean, I've been doing that since I was a little kid, but growing up in as a teenager in high school, I went to Maine Conservation School for 5 summers in a row, where I did courses in primitive skills, bushcraft, and then it all culminated in the last summer was called Junior Maine Guide. So in the state of Maine, you actually have to be licensed by the state to guide people, literally guide people for hunting, fishing, whitewater rafting, sea kayaking, and recreational. And so Junior Maine Guide is for kids age 13 to 17, and they go and what's called a testing encampment, and you go and you do a week long of tests. It culminates, it's 20 tests. You have to pass 16 out of the 20 tests to become a certified Junior Maine Guide. And so that was my last summer as a teenager. I did that, and I got it. And then the next summer was the summer in between, graduating and joining the Navy. So I grew up doing that. I grew up hunting. I can fish. I hate fishing, but I can fish. Um, and now since we've been here in El Paso, I did that. I got into the Navy. Um, I worked a lot in the Navy, so I didn't have a lot of time. I was just doing my job. I didn't have a lot of time to go out and like do fieldcrafty, bushcrafty stuff. Um, but then once I got out, I started getting back into it. And now since we've been here, and the boys are both now school age, that gives me time in the afternoon to actually go out and do stuff. And we're so close here in El Paso to other places in New Mexico that I get to almost every weekend we get to go do something. Like today, we went up to the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and what's it called? Prehistoric Trackways National Monument, which is at the base of the Robadella Mountains. And I got to go do some tracking practice and just got to go up and down the washes while the boys took a nap. Because that's kind of become our MO. We go do a family day trip or a hike or something, and when we're done with it, the boys take a nap in the car, and I get to go off for an hour or two and do whatever I want.
Dude, that's so awesome.
So
that's great.
I'm blessed because once Sarah's done with the Army by February next year, we're moving back to the East Coast, back to the Carolinas, and I'll be working again. Both boys will be full-time in school, and I'll be working. So I'm taking advantage of it as much as I can now. And enjoying it, because the Southwest is just, it's incredible. Because like within 2 hours from me, there's half a dozen different environments that you don't see anywhere else in the country. So it's nice. It sounds cliche to say keeps you on your toes, but it really does, because I can go from here to here to here, and it's different gear, different, not tactics, but a different environment, and like the things you would do in that environment. Especially like tracking. So
living the dream.
What environments are you talking about?
So there's 6 different. I'm in the Tularosa Basin. El Paso's on the southern end of it, and then Mexico and Juarez. It goes basically down all the way into Mexico. It's where a giant glacier was, and there's like 6 different mountain ranges on either side of the basin, and they're all different types of environments in each mountain range. The Franklin Mountains are just arid and desert. The Oregon Mountains are arid and desert, but the higher you get up, it turns into pine and juniper, like almost alpine. You got the Waco Mountains, that's just nothing but rocks. Sacramento Mountains, which are the highest ones, which have, pine trees. It's like legitimate forest, pine forest.
Wow.
And the San Andreas Mountains, which are within the White Sands Missile Range. And there's actually, the San Andreas Wildlife Refuge is within the missile range itself, so there's no public access. And it's restricted, there's no public access. And it's one of the last, how did they put it? It's one of the last untouched Southwest desert mountain ranges in the country where there's nothing. There's no trails. Humans don't go there. And there's, I think it's a type of bighorn sheep that actually lives just in those mountains. So it's all of that. And then you've got white sands, which is the actual white sand, which I've gone and done some tracking and some other things up in the dunes up there. Then you have red sands, which is farther south, which is literally red sand. And it's these mesquite outcrops, copuses. And it's just, you kind of just wind your way through the sand dunes and these mesquite bushes. And that's all within 2 hours. So like if I want to go up to the high forest, we go up to the mountains, the high forest, and I'm in a forest wooded environment. And then next week I could go to red sands and spend, 3 hours doing a loop, just walking through these red sand dunes with the mesquite bushes. And it's just,
it's so cool.
It's a lot and it's cool because I get to test out and do different things. Like that most recent post I did on Instagram about the cold weather stuff. You wouldn't necessarily use that, and you wouldn't think you'd use that in the desert, but with how dry it is here and how cracked and dry you can get from being out in the desert environment in the winter, that's kind of why I try to tie those kind of fieldcrafty posts into, what I do.
Right.
So
That's awesome. That honestly reminds me of my hometown. I grew up in Oregon, and you could drive 2 hours. And like you said, I could be at the beach. I could be in
yeah,
a mountain range. I could be in a desert.
yeah,
Just crazy. The crazy shift.
yeah.
Just
Well, and that's
the job of
we were
passing seems like.
stationed up in the Pacific North. We were up in Washington, so I mean close to Oregon, and
Hmm.
where we were on the Puget Sound, you go this way, and there's frickin' Cascade Mountains. You go this way, you go out towards Yakima, and it's kind of like arid, tundra almost. You go to the beach, and it's just. I don't think people. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say people are small-minded, but I don't think people take the time to actually like look outside of like a quick drive. Does that make sense? A lot of people
Yeah.
think 2 hours is a long drive when it's like, okay, it's 2 hours, but look what you get to go do. You know what I mean? And
Well,
that's
most people's lives are within a 30, 45-minute drive.
I know it's crazy. I
They
think,
live their life in a bubble.
yeah, my
It's
in-laws
crazy.
are kind of like that. Where my wife is from Central Carolina, like when we've gone and visited, and we're like, we're gonna go see the Civil War battlefield, and it's an hour and 10 minutes away, and they're like, an hour 10 minutes. Might as well take the whole day, and it's like, well, we are going to take the whole day. It's a day trip.
And they've never seen it, right?
No, they've
seen
never been
right?
to it. They've heard about it, but it's an hour and 10 minutes away, and they've never been to it. It's like, dude, just drive.
Yeah.
Like that's what we did when we were in Washington. A lot of the places we went to were in Maine, because we were in Washington and we went to Maine, and even in Maine, I mean, most can't. The phrase in Maine is you can't get there from here. Like you've got to drive to get to a place,
Yeah.
So
That's cold.
any day trip we wanted to do, we wanted to go to the mountains. It was an hour and a half, hour 45 away. We wanted to go to the beach. It was an hour and a half.
That's
away.
how I felt in Texas when we had to, because we've had to go up to Maryland for my school. All my family lives in Oregon, so
Yeah.
We drive, and Texas is the only place I've ever been where you could drive all day. At the end of the day, you'd still be there.
8 hours, dude. You can drive 8 hours in any direction and still be in Texas.
Bruh,
I was like, what is going on?
if you measure it from El Paso, Texas, this is so depressing. From El Paso, Texas to Venice Beach, California is shorter than El Paso, Texas to Galveston, Texas. You can get to the beach in California quicker than you can to the beach in Texas. Like
That's just sick.
and every time we've talked about going and visiting family back east, like you don't really realize it, because where El Paso is, and the highway 10 comes across this way, it goes 10 and up. It's the most southern U.S. highway, right? Where we are in line with Highway 25 goes all the way up to freaking Montana. Like we're that far west. And I told Sarah, I was like, look, if we want to go visit people, it's going to take us 3 days, because it literally will take an entire day just to get from here, from El Paso, to East Texas. It's just
Insanity.
It's just such a big state. Everything's bigger in Texas. Huh.
It's insanity.
Well,
It's
and what's
insane.
this? Texas is what, the second biggest state, and I think Montana's like third. No, fourth. Montana's massive. It goes Alaska, Texas, California, Montana. And it's like one of those.
Yeah.
Those are the places like you could drive, like you said, 8 hours in any direction, and it's just you're still there. So,
Good lord.
Crazy to think.
hold on, rewind that back. What were we? Oh, the different environments, right?
Yeah.
So and I found that West Texas sucks. West Texas, there is nothing but bushes and rocks, and so we end up spending all our time in New Mexico. New Mexico is a hidden gem. It is. I mean, they call it the land. Its motto is the land of enchantment. It's the mountains, the Oregon Mountains here in New Mexico, which I go to quite a bit, and I've seen mountains all over the world. In Europe, here in the United States, the Oregon Mountains in New Mexico are the most gorgeous mountains I've ever seen. It's a mountain range that when we come around the turn and you actually see the Oregons, these craggy peaks, every time I see it, it takes my freaking breath away. And I don't know how many times I've gotten in trouble. Sarah yells at me because I end up swerving into the shoulder onto the rumble strip because I'm paying attention more to the mountains.
Yeah.
It's just, it's right here. It's right here. You know, you don't have to go far to get to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things with this whole fieldcraft. You know, I get a lot of guys messaging me on Instagram, like, you know, where do you go? You know, where do you go? Or have you ever had anybody call the cops on you? Blah blah blah. It's like, dude, do you understand how much public land there is in the United States? Like, you can literally go to a national forest, obviously within the state's regulations, like New York or Illinois or California with firearms, but you can go to any national forest in the country and just carry your gun wherever you want. And you can,
we'll talk about Hidden Gem, right?
It is, and in most national forests, their shooting regulations average is 200 yards away from anything, a trailhead, a trail, a building, a body of water, and you can just shoot. Like, obviously, they don't want you to shoot at trees and use trees as a backstop, but you can just like take your freaking steel plate and your long range rifle and just go hike in the middle of a national forest, set it up, and just shoot and do whatever you want, and then camp, and then shoot again. And people don't realize that. I'm like, dude, look at your state, find a national forest, and just drive there. You know?
Well, it makes me think of when we went for Six's bachelor party. We went out to Tennessee, and our cabin, you could go up to the second floor out the window, and you'd look out at the Smoky Mountains National Park, and you're just looking, and you're like, whoa, because it's just...
There's just just nothing. Like, I mean, it's gorgeous, but there's just no one. It's
just pine.
Oh my god!
And I'm like, people live here. Like, this isn't
that the best places to go when you go to a place and you're just like, people actually live here. Like, it's not just a vacation for some people.
Yeah, and we went out hiking one time, and I was just looking out, and you get to this waterfall, and you like look out, it's just this mountain range. I'm like, people just, this is a daily for some people.
And that that's made me freaking. I didn't take for granted living in New England, but living out here, oh god, do I miss the green and do I miss water? Yeah. When I was up in the Oregons 2 weeks ago with a buddy, and we found this little stream that's snow melt, first running water I've seen in the desert the entire time we've lived here. Like, and that's with the rains and stuff we've had. Like, it was an actual running stream. And it was just, like, I was like, oh my god, I miss home. As in, like, the East Coast. Because, like, I was, like, staring at running water. And my buddy was like, you all right? I'm like, dude, I haven't seen this in years. Like, literally years. It's running water. It's just, I mean, there's running water up, like, in the Sacramento Mountains and whatnot. Because it's a high. They got springs and stuff up there. Yeah. But down here, where I normally am, and the great,
dude, this is magic.
It is. Well, and like you talking about the Great Smoky Mountains, just green. People back east, people east of the Mississippi, I feel like take the greenery for granted until you come out somewhere like El Paso and you're like, oh my god, everything's just poop brown colored and dry, and there's dust everywhere.
Well, I mean, even when you hit like Central Texas, like nothing's a real tree anymore. It's just cedar brush.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm either stuck in a cedar brush, or I'm sitting on a cactus, or like I'm like,
oh god,
busting my ass on shale. Like, it's just it's miserable.
Don't get me started on the shale. Oh my god, that is the worst. You know how many pairs of cami pants I've torn just sitting down, like sitting down and eat my lunch, and I get up, just freaking the seat of. I have 2 pairs of Desert Tiger Stripe pants, and the seat of one of them, I don't know how, and I'm not a great seamstress, but I can sew, but I don't know how many freaking stitch lines. Those pants, they're not even worth wearing anymore. It's the shale, and it's just everything out west. It doesn't want to kill you. It just wants to poke you. And that it's just so, it's not scary. It's just so obnoxious. Because like today, where I was just walking, wasn't paying attention, leg scraped against a weird looking cactus thing, and I had to stop, and I spent 5 minutes pulling a dozen little cactus freaking, not barbs, but cactus spikes out of my leg. And it's just, oof. So
guess this is life now.
Huh?
Yeah. I mean, at least to me, it seems like you have like at least a great appreciation of the environment and the different environments that you've like at least gone out in, do you have a favorite that you tend to draw towards?
What, like in general or here in the Southwest?
I mean, honestly, in the Southwest, because I haven't been out that way, so it makes me curious.
So here in the Southwest, there's like the basin that I'm in, because basically the Southwest is just literally mountain ranges, and they're not valleys because they're so wide. They're basins because they were all formed by massive glaciers, right? But it's literally mountains and basins, and mountains and basins, and some of them are like here with the Franklins right here, where they're super dry. But like ones like the Oregons, which are the farther north into New Mexico you go, it's like a mixture. The low part of the mountain has the cactuses and the yuccas and whatnot. And then the higher you get up, you get juniper and spruce and pine. And you can smell it. The farther you go up, especially in the hot sun, you can start smelling the juniper. It smells like gin. Like, I don't know how many hikes I've been on, and I'm walking up the mountain.
That's amazing.
And it smells like gin. It's incredible. And
it smells like freedom and fresh air.
Literally, right? So freaking walking up that kind of mountain. So what is that? It's semi-arid mountainous environment. Is really interesting because the Sacramento's here is like a high pines forest. So it's kind of like back home. You only get a couple types of trees in it. The most challenging aspect of that is you're at 9,500 feet. Most of your hikes, between 9,500 and 10,000. And that's from living down here at 3,500 feet to go up there and go hiking for the day. It'll kick, especially if you have any type of kit, it'll kick your ass. Yeah. And we're coming from where were we in Maine, where we were. I think we were 53 feet above sea level. And then coming here to El Paso, I'm 3,500 feet above sea level. Like even at the gym, I'll still, while I'm lifting, sometimes just have to stop and like catch my breath. Because it's not thinner air. It's just a higher altitude. Kids who live out here in West Texas, who go play kids back in East Texas, they run faster when they go back east. Because there's this plat. Once you get west of San Antonio, you start to go up and down a little bit, but there's this plat which brings you up onto a plateau near Sierra Blanca in Texas. And once you get up to it, you get up to about 4,300 feet, and then you crest over those mountains, and it drops you here on this side of it, and everything on this side of it is 3,600 and up, all the way towards freaking Arizona. It's just, and those higher elevations, like I enjoy going up the Sacramento Mountains, but like I said, it's green and it's nice to get away from here. But I grew up in that kind of environment. But like in all around environment, one of the reasons I'm glad we're moving back to the East Coast, an all around environment would be just like a temperate woodland environment where like you can actually wear green camis and like you don't have to worry about where you're going to get your water. That's my ideal environment, because in a temperate woodland environment too, when you're talking, I don't want to say tactically, but tactics wise, I'm growing up in Maine and hunting in Maine. I was using a 30-30 with iron sights because you couldn't see farther than 75 yards. And it just, I find that to be a hell of a lot easier place to do things in than the wide open desert. Or even somewhere like I couldn't imagine the dudes who are stationed up at Fort Carson and they're at freaking, they're going up and doing their rucks and their daily runs at freaking 6,000, 7,000 feet. And it's just like, no, thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah, that's hell.
I like the green in the ocean.
So with the different environments, with your channel pushing, fieldcraft and just really, no nonsense, applicable things with, historical context. What would you see I guess what I want to ask is, what would you say is the greatest benefit for you focusing on fieldcraft in the context of conflict?
So fieldcraft, and I guess in conflict would be, I think in the last 20 years, Western militaries have become so skewed through the global war on terror and the direct action door kicker nonsense. I'm not saying it's nonsense. It has its time and place. But for the last 20 years, I mean, yeah, there were, well, even then, guys were on patrol and they still had to take compounds, which is technically CQB direct action, because they're right there. They come across IEDs and combatants right in front of them, as opposed to like not an actual infantry war, but a war where soldiers have to sustain themselves in an environment. And I feel like but it also is true that the military has kind of gravitated away from that from the last 20 years of conflict. And fieldcraft, if you don't, as much as it sounds like guys harp on it, but it's an important thing to harp on. Like, if you don't know how to make a fire or purify water, and I'm not talking about here in a desert environment, but just generally speaking, because I posted something. Remember my page was Roadies Plaid before it got zucked and became Bush Plaid, right? And it was probably back in September or something. I posted about the fieldcrafty stuff, purifying water, and X, Y, and Z, and my methods of doing it. And somebody in the comments said, in layman's terms, you wouldn't be purifying 15 gallons of water, blah blah blah. It's like, dude, if you're in a forward environment and you're out of water, you're gonna make a full stop. You're gonna find water and you're gonna get everybody water, because and people talk what's going on in Ukraine, but it shows just the logistical nightmare of a modern war. Well, modernly equipped war. They're fighting in trenches still. Yeah. I read an interview, not on Instagram. It was an interview. I think my pop sent me the link. It was a Ukrainian soldier saying that when they were digging trenches, they dug up the remains, the bones of Soviet soldiers that fought there during the Second World War. They were digging trenches in fighting positions that were in the same place 80 years ago. Like, so it's just, wow. It's just, I don't think anybody was ready for it too. And I don't think the U.S. military is ready for it. What was the article 2 months ago where they're just starting to teach Army cooks sustainability, like meat preservation, because we've been so reliant on, and rewinding back to your initial question about fieldcraft and conflict, we're so reliant on technology and logistics today. For 20 years, we had guys going on a patrol, going to quote unquote kick down doors, and they brought their 72-hour, their assault pack, and we're going to be back. It literally, I had this conversation with somebody the other day, talking about like how it was in Black Hawk Down. You're not going to need that, dude. We're going to be back before it's dark.
Back before dark.
Right? You know what I mean? Like these, and the thing is, for the most part, in the global war on terror, that was true. You're not going to need that, dude. It's a 3-day patrol. And it was, because they got exfil and they're done. But, I don't think a modern, like, infantry squad or a Cav Scout squad, and I do count them because, that's the majority of the soldiers here on Fort Bliss, Cav Scouts, right? I don't think, in talking with the guys in my wife's unit and talking with buddies here that live in housing here, like, none of them know how to do any tracking. None of them know how. Like, I got a new buddy right across the street. Great guy. He's been in infantry. He's an 11 Bravo. He's been an infantryman for 9 years. But, I showed him my war room, and I kind of, with hanging out and stuff, I took him out up to the organs, and he asked me, like, hey, can you show me some of, like, the fieldcrafty stuff, like shelters and fire starting and stuff? And he's been in the Army for 9 years.
Yeah.
Like, think about that. Yeah. Like, he's an infantryman.
So when we were in a mounted unit. Yeah. Right. So we were mechanized.
Yeah.
We'd go out. If we had to go out, we'd go out. If we had to stay out, during FTX, we would stay and we would sleep by our vehicles.
Right.
Never more than, 20, 30 yards away from our vehicles. We'd had all of our rucks attached to our vehicles.
Right.
all our sustainment, all our comms, everything on that vehicle. If that vehicle went down, we'd cross-load onto another vehicle.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think not one person knew how to make a fire, not one person knew how to make shelter. Forget about water. We had, water buffaloes that followed us everywhere.
And that's the thing. I watched an interview. A Brit. He was a Brit who was a reservist in the British Army, and then he went to fight in Ukraine at the beginning. Came back for a little bit and went back. One of the things he brought with him was like 3 canteen cups, because he knew 2 canteen cups and 3 mess tins, because he knew from watching the war from 2014 until it became that it was going to be a lot of static things and sitting and being kind of self-sustaining. And he said the Western volunteers that were coming in with no canteens, no like canteen cups or something to do that, and the amount of guys that are like trading him cigarettes and full meals just to heat up their tea and coffee because they don't have it. And you think about that, that's Western volunteers coming in, either they're veterans or they never served or whatnot, but they're coming in, and the guys don't think about things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what you just said about your guys, like being mechanized and being so close to your vehicle, the line stops eventually when it comes to logistics and like the water buffaloes following you and the vehicle.
Well, think about Russia with that 40-mile long.
I was going to mention that
road of all their trucks. I mean, we've and that's what we're saying with I totally agree that I'd say no modern military is ready for a peer-on-peer fight anymore.
Well, here's the thing.
We become so pacified because that
China
mile
is.
long. That's not the exception. That would be the norm.
Right. Well, dude. Russia's not a peer. They're not, dude. They're not a peer. They're the only thing they're peer on is the amount of nukes they have. But they're not actually a peer threat. Look, Ukraine is spanking them on the daily with our arms, right? They're spanking them with our arms, but they're the only the closest thing to a peer we would have is China, and that's just by numbers. Yeah, they've got a lot of technology, but and even if something kicked off with China, it wouldn't be a mainland thing. It would turn into island hopping, which has its own freaking
problems.
Series of freaking difficulties. But you talk just logistics. People rely too much, and her chain of command. My wife's chain of command. Just their logistics with getting things fixed. You know how many people they just leave sitting for days to get something fixed, and that's in a training environment in the field here. Hey, our 88 broke down. And the 88 driver and another 91 Mike sit in the 88 for 3 days waiting for a tow. Here.
Well, think
right
about
here.
NTC. Yeah, so U.S. Army NTC, if you're Stryker, if you're Humvee, if anything that you need goes down, your driver's hanging out that mechanic's corner in that motor pool, and he's waiting. We had a guy who our vehicle went down and he was waiting for over a week. Just sitting there, not doing anything. No one was tracking him. No one was in communication with him. Just hang out with his vehicle.
Dude, see that?
Because
that's just insane in a training environment. When I was there, end of all of and came back, she was gone for 40 days, right? When her unit her company got into the box, they went black on water day 2, day 4, and day 7. Listen. That is stateside. Where this isn't Iraq, this isn't Afghanistan. They're not in the middle of nowhere. They're in the box, and they went black 3 times. And the first time they went black, it was 115 that day, and they went black. And she went down as a heat cat, and later 3 other people after her. She was what was it? What was it called? White sail. She was a white sail for 6 days. She had heart issues. She had something going on with her chest and her heart. dizziness, blah blah blah, all avoidable. And this is coming from her chain of command that when they were in the week before you go for the 2 weeks in the box, it was 110, and guys were taking off their blouses and walking around in their skivvy shirt and their trousers, their cami pants, and the fucking sergeant major and the battalion commander were yelling at everybody to put their blouses back on in 110 degrees. And the sergeant major comes up to my wife and says, "You need to do your job and make sure everybody is uniform." And she said, "No, Sergeant Major, you need to do your job." And she just turned around and walked away because it's 110. They had 20 heat casualties in that 1 week in the rear before they went to the box. And those guys who were heat casualties in that week then spent the next 3 weeks at White Sail doing nothing. And then what happened? What happened this cycle with they had one guy killed himself. One guy died as a heat casualty, and another guy lost his arm from the elbow down because an 88 door fell on it.
Oh my god,
dude! I'm not making this up. If this is all happening in California, and it's supposed to be a scripted training exercise, you imagine what would happen if we went and yes, okay, using the term appear on peer. Like if we ended up on the ground, Russia is the tier below us. But when it comes head to head, because the other thing too is we've had all these armaments and everything, the vehicle wise armaments. Her company commander's Bradley was used in Gulf War One in 1991. There's still, she said that there's like they purposefully, it's like a tradition thing. There's a little piece of graffiti inside it in her command, and the commander picked that one because of it. But there's a graffiti thing that says like Saddam something 90, the date 1991, and they've left it for 30 years. And that's the Bradley that her commander would take over to frickin' Ukraine tomorrow if they shipped everybody. And the thing is,
well, and that's the thing. So even if there's not, even if Russia isn't, a peer, right?
Right.
They're not relying on, they're not hanging out in caves or relying on IEDs like this, like actual, force on force conflict.
True. Okay. Right? So how about instead of peer on peer, force on force?
Force on force,
as opposed to like a counterterror. What with the last 20 years?
Yeah.
Force on force. Russia versus and not even NATO. Because I had this. It wasn't an argument. It was a discussion with a group chat I was in a while ago. To be completely honest, the European militaries, the Western European militaries, their armies, they're professional soldiers, in my opinion, are better and more professional than just a regular U.S. Army 11 Bravo. I'd take a Danish infantryman over an American infantryman. Because you want to know what? One of the big things we were just talking about Fort Irwin and training, every foreign soldier I've talked to, their number one complaint or their issue with the U.S. military as a whole is the amount of deaths we have in training. Like the training that those militaries do are so not scripted but safe, and they follow a specific protocol. Deaths in trainings, there's no excuse for it. There is no excuse. We're going to have at least one death at NTC for it to be a successful cycle. What the Like, really? No, that was something somebody said. Well, now, whether that's supposed to be satire or not, that's not funny. It's California. I mean, can you imagine being the parent?
We had someone crushed by 2 strikers.
Can you imagine being the parent of that kid, getting that letter, getting that phone call, getting a chaplain? Hey, your son died from heat stroke in Fort Irwin, California. It's just so rewinding back. The European militaries, they take a lot of things to safeguard casualties in training, and I think that also translates to their capabilities in the field or in an actual environment. And the other thing too is when their guys train, they fucking train. And like everything is allocated, like food. Here they just have in the United States military, there's just MREs everywhere. In a foreign military, from the guys that I've talked to, like the commander, requisitions X amount of meals for X amount of days, and that's it. And everybody has everything. You're not running black on water 2 days into a training cycle. Like their European logistics, and the argument is, well, they're smaller and everything. Okay, but they still get the job done. And we're so much bigger. Shouldn't we be better at it? We have so much more money and resources that we should be able to do it better than the Netherlands, the French. Christ, everybody's from the French. I'd take a. Anymore. Wait, say that again.
Sorry, I made a step over you. I was just saying, I think the problem is we don't have any pride anymore.
Yeah,
the pride's gone.
There's what? I would say maybe most of the 82nd, and I mean Fort Drum itself sucks, but like most of the 10th Mountain guys I've met, they're about it when it comes to the Army and like guys being proud of like the unit they're in. I've never met a guy here being proud of being in the 1st Armored Division, other than the chain of command. Like
no one's gonna be proud of being or whatever. Ugh. Like I feel like once you get to like Ranger Bat or things like that, then
and even then, but they're a special unit. They're a specialty unit. You know what I mean? Like, and you have to pass. It's not like any Tom, Dick, and Harry can get assigned to that unit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, I think the 20 years of this war also turned, especially with the lowering the standards at the beginning and the middle of the war, turned it into, I don't know what better way to say it, turned it into more of a welfare state.
Welfare.
You know how many guys I served with in the Navy, and this is the Navy. This is Master at Arms, MP. How many people I was served with that? Well, why'd you join the Navy? Oh, I had nothing better going on, so I thought I'd join the Navy. Here I am. Like they just did it, and it's not even for the benefits. I had nothing better going on, so I just joined the Navy. Like
that's how you end up as a cook.
I wanted to be in the military. 4 years old, San Iwo Jima, John Wayne. I'm going to be a Marine. Marine Corps recruiter, blah blah blah. I had a misdiagnosis of psoriasis. That the Marine recruiter was like, well, now that you told me, we've got to send the paperwork to BUMED. And I went to the Navy recruiter and I explained to him, I was like, go get somebody to say that it's not psoriasis and you'll be good. Went to my doctor, got a free referral to a dermatologist, and he was like, oh no, it's dermatitis. And there I am in the Navy. Like, so I always wanted, and then lo and behold, I joined the Navy as a Master at Arms thinking, I'm going to be base police, or I'm going to be a Master at Arms on a aircraft carrier. Nope. I'm with Marine Corps Security Force Battalion Banger in freaking Silverdale, Washington, and I get treated like a Marine for the next 3 years. So I didn't get to be in the Marine Corps, but I got treated like a Marine for freaking 3 years. So, and I honestly, Sarah and I joke about it all the time because we have 2 buddies here who were in the 1st Armored Division who served in the Marine Battalion with us. They got out and they went straight into the Army. She stayed in the Navy, blah, blah, blah. And they're freaking here. We had Thanksgiving with one of them, and the other one, he was one of the guys I went up to the mountains with. He was 0311 in the Marine Corps, joined the Army as an 11 Bravo, and he's freaking here. And I would take a Marine infantryman over an Army infantryman any day of the week. Now, with all the new that's going on in the Marine Corps, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about, because even every fucking Marine is prideful. There you go. Going back to what you said. It's pride. The Marines are so prideful of being a fucking Marine, and it shows in everything they do. And in the Army, it's just, it's just so sad. I'm sitting in the parking lot. Sarah's running to the commissary, and I'm seeing these guys walking around in uniform, and they're just kind of like moping around. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. It's sad. And
it's like the baggy uniform, their caps, pulled up, smoking a cigarette, walking around, just talking on their phone, or whatever. There's no pride in the uniform. There's no pride in what you're doing. There's no violence of action. No, like focus. Like you said.
And that comes down to the environment that they're in their command, because the day-to-day life, speaking as an infantryman, sucks. It is terrible.
Right.
Daily operations are terrible as an infantryman. You get treated like janitors. You aren't recognized as like the actual fighting force, the tip of the spear of the Army. You're recognized as someone who's going to go around and cut the grass at the commissary. That's it.
Yeah.
Well,
there's no, until you're at a promotion ceremony or whatever else, we're like, oh, you're, such and such, whatever.
And it's no, and it's just the commands, and I'm not throwing any command under the bus, but every single command I've seen in here with especially any of these commands, they're. So I was only in one command in the Navy, but like I told you at the beginning, Sarah and I have been together, and she's done law enforcement. She was a desk sergeant when she had a pregnancy order, so a completely different job than like a beat cop, like law enforcement. Then she was a recruiter, where she was the only prior service recruiter in the entire state of Maine. So look at Maine, and she was the one recruiter for the entire state as a prior service recruiter, right? So I drove her around the entire state, helping her, literally helping her do her job, because she's not from there. I know where all the places are and everything. And so it's, like I said, I haven't lived vicariously through her service, but we've been doing it together because I enjoy it. Until she joined the Army. And with the Marines we served with the Navy command she was with Bush Plaid at its height, I was talking with guys in a dozen different militaries all over the country, all over the world, and getting information and just talking with them, just in general. This command and these guys, it's the worst leadership I've ever seen / heard of, because I've seen it first person, but I've also heard more stories from other dudes in other units. It's terrible, and it's like 20 years of GWAT has made officers just worried about their own career and their advancement to the next rank and looking good for the people above them, that they don't take in. No, it's not even that they don't take into account. There's just a blatant disregard for the lower enlisted and even the senior enlisted, which imagine being an E8 and the 03 and the 05, you see them and they don't, you can tell that they don't care about you. Why would you then care about your fucking E3s and E4s? Like what you just said, it's the command environment. It's sad because how big the military is. It is a massive organization.
It is, and just the complete lack of capability is so disheartening. Because you'll see, and granted these are movies, right? But you'll watch something like Saving Private Ryan, where Tom Hanks will be like, "Hey, here's your orders," and he's like, "Oh, well, we've got to go, 3 towns that way,
right?"
And complete this mission, and they had the autonomy, and there you go,
right?
And you'd go and do it. You'd go and figure it out. Your sustainment, all right. If you had to, A actions on contact, A actions going to contact, anything, you would figure it out, and you'd have to go get the mission done. Here, like you said, the curse of GWAT. If anything goes wrong along the way, everything is full stop, and we have to handle that little thing before we can complete the mission, and we don't have sustainment along the way because we didn't allocate for an emergency to happen in combat.
Right. You ready for this? You ready for this?
You screw the pooch.
Your Saving Private Ryan analogy and the GWAT. You ready for this? World War II, German Army. Their chain of command stopped at I don't know what the German word for was, sergeant. Their NCO. If their NCO died, the soldiers didn't have any tertiary plans, and there wasn't anybody else to pick up the slack. What you just said about Saving Private Ryan in World War II in the U.S. Army, here's your mission, regardless of the size of the unit, and they went and did it. And that was the difference between the Allies, the Americans, and like the Germans, was that the Germans had a very strict chain of command, and if Sturmgewehr was dead, what do we do? I don't know. What do we do, Hans? And they didn't have a freaking plan of action. Now, some units did, yes, blah, blah. People can argue with me about that. But what I'm saying is World War II U.S. Army doctrine was the private can take over for the sergeant if need be, generally
Right.
speaking. We're not talking later in the war where there were a ton of draftees and stuff. You know what I mean?
Well, nowadays it's two levels up.
Right. Well, so
Is,
you're ready, so
is,
you're ready
is
for
what doctrine is.
what you were saying about that is I feel like where the U.S. Army is now is where the German Army was in World War II when it comes to command. What you just said, something happens, they have to stop and can sort it out. Something happened in the German Army, they had to stop it, and not the. And for everybody that's listening, not the fucking Blitzkrieg. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about freaking the war in freaking Western Europe as a whole was just there was a lot of stopping and waiting in the German army because they had to wait for somebody above them, And I feel like that's what your analogy of Saving Private Ryan is perfect. That's what the army's like now. The U.S. military is like now. They gotta wait.
Well, now we have the per example with Russia in the early days of the Russian-Ukraine war.
Exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
If you rely on procedure only, if you don't allow any room for your leaders to adapt and figure things out, if you're like, no, this is your ABCD, you only stick to that, you're going to fail.
Yeah,
and that's another thing. That's the difference in World War II. The U.S. Army or Marines or whatever would pass down orders. They wouldn't be like, hey, yes, you need to do this. This is how you do it. This. It would be, here's your objective. Get it done. Nowadays, there is so much micromanagement of every little task to get done by doctrine that there is no room for imagination. There's no room for anything like that. It's just you have to do it this way, and if you don't, Article 15.
Right.
Well, and what you were saying, Bush Plaid, was how big the army is now. Like, 6, you're talking about one of your side projects is you want to recreate the op order essentially. Mm-hmm. But every single op order I've ever sat through, I fall asleep. Not 5-10 minutes because it's 20 different levels wide, 5 rows deep, and you're like, I don't even know where my job is in this. And your commander is saying, hey, dude, you're awake. Yeah, but why are we talking about the weather in 5 days? My mission ends in 2. Like,
yeah,
that's because you have narcolepsy.
It's like going back. We're talking about. I hate bringing up World War II because it was 80 years ago, but like it's going back to when D-Day happened, Overlord happened, and they had everybody down to the lowest private understand the freaking sand tables and understand their objective and every unit around them, so that if they fell off target, they could complete an objective. Today's military, it's just there's no room for what you said, imagination. There's none. And if you do, like you said, if you go off order, boom, Article 15, because you weren't following an order. And it's just, and I rewind back to what I said of 20 years of GWAT has turned all these officers and the people who are coming up with the orders, it's just everything's about them. And that trickles down to your soldiers don't know how to do their job. Let's go back to the fieldcraft question. Soldiers don't know how to do their job. They don't know how to make a fucking shelter because they're waiting for the vehicles to take them out of the field, but they get left behind for 3 days in the rain and snow, and then half the troop gets pneumonia because guys didn't know how to make a proper shelter. Just laying on the ground under a tarp. It's
that, and you aren't allowed to build a fire.
Right, and that's probably my buddy right across the street told me about. He was at Fort Campbell, and he said that last winter they were in the field, and there was a winter storm, and they got stuck out in the field for 5 days after a winter storm because no vehicles could come down to get them because of how much snow was on the ground, and their commanders told them they couldn't have a fire. Like, they're in a training environment, and they're stuck in the training environment. It's not even like it's a nominal thing where, like, the enemy's looking for you, and the commander said you can't have a fire. And that's one of the big arguments I've had with people on Instagram about fieldcraft, about fire making, is you wouldn't make a fire in X, Y, and Z. You can't tell me that the guys... We're not talking about Ukraine where, like, the front lines, where they have the fucking drones. But, like, guys in the Ukraine that are in the woods near the front or just in an area just where they're stationed aren't making fucking fires, a bucket fire, one way or another to keep warm. I know you can't make a fire in a trench because it'll give your position away. even though you're in a trench. Like, the enemy knows where you are. Like, you know what I mean? And it's
it's so easy to poke and to prod and to try to poke holes in someone's in someone's thought process or someone's training from across the keyboard. But if you're stuck on some wilderness and some conflict, right? Would you rather potentially give your position away or freeze to death? Choose.
That's the thing. Freaking patrol bases up until the GWAT and the way that guys have been taught patrol bases. And look, I'm not an expert. Blah, blah, blah. I do a lot of reading and I do a lot of practicing myself. But when it comes to a patrol base, if you're not on the front lines, or even if you're in enemy territory, but you're doing something like a long-range reconnaissance where, like, you're in the wilderness in an enemy area, there's nothing wrong with making a fire to cook and keep your guys warm, as long as you're doing things to mitigate. Everybody talks about thermal this and fucking drones that. That's it's the reality of modern war, but it's not. It's just what you said. People try to pick and poke at the things that you're saying. Like, would you rather have your guys freeze to death, or make a fire and, oh no, there might be a heat signature for some asshole to pick up with thermals? Like, I'd rather have my guys be warm, and then at least when they're warm, they can react to contact. You know what I mean?
I think it's less about the heat signature, the thermal. Rather, it's more the light signature. Because the light from those fires can, no matter how small, can travel a great distance. Even if you have trees, it still casts that freaking huge, like, it lights those trees up. You can tell where there's a fire. And
that's true. And that's another thing is, I mean, I don't want to go into like a whole field crafting spiel, but like,
yeah, no, I got
you. If you know, obviously, we all know that fire casts light. But if you're in control of a patrol base, if you know that, you're going to have your guys do things to mitigate the cold and put out those fires potentially before dark. Dry wood, less smoke during the day, not giving off a smoke signal, good to go. We can cook and keep our guys warm. So once it starts getting dark, how do we mitigate that light emission, right? What do? You can heat some rocks up and put them under and have the guys. So I generally don't ever bring a sleeping pad with me on any of my outings. Why? Because it's bulky, it takes up room, and we're not in not in a combat environment, but like, I can cut down a pile of spruce boughs, pine boughs, branches to lay on, and when I'm done, kind of throw them around. I don't have some enemy force tracking me. You can do that with guys in a patrol base, because if you're setting up a patrol base and you're utilizing fires to purify water, cook food, and for heat and sanitation, if you're relying on the fire to do those things, you're going to have to collect wood and firewood from around the area and the position you're in, which is going to leave a signature regardless. So who cares if you cut X, Y, and Z branches off? But going back to what I was saying about the mitigating the light, you've got guys who are bed down in like on a bed of boughs. You just heat up some rocks and put them underneath there. It won't keep them warm all night, but they'll at least get some warm sleep when they're not on watch, on guard for the because you've got to cycle through. That's another thing. Guys who are walking around in a freaking circle around your position on guard are going to be warmer than guys that are just laying in their sleeping bag. So
proper layering. I mean, not so much for the light signature, but for smoke signature at least. I think it's called a Dakota fire.
Mm-hmm.
Where you dig underneath. Makes a smokeless fire, right? But
and I love that because every freaking fire post I've ever made, there's always one guy commenting, "You got to make yourself a Dakota fire." It's like, yes, you do.
Yes, thanks a lot, buddy. Good job. But something I liked your comment about. You're not on the front line. So, me and Nomadic Fieldcraft, we're working on a project, like a skills matrix kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
To try to apply for different guys, things that they could be working on in order to fill, different roles. But some category that we're going to break things down into is whether you're in a preparatory phase or if you're in conflict. And so
Right.
being in a preparatory phase, right, being in training, you can make allowances for these things,
Right.
So you're not concerned with, X, Y, and Z if you were actually, in conflict or had the potential to be in conflict. So just thinking through your context, right?
And that's the thing is everybody's. I mean, we were just talking about the beginning of this about the different environments I'm in. My environments and my context, the way I do things, may be completely different from somebody else, but that doesn't negate it, right? You know what I mean? And it doesn't negate that person's the view or the way that they do something, and that's I think one of the biggest problems is people can't take suggestions, and they feel like if it's not exactly it goes along with what their thought process is, it's wrong. And
well, like Six said, people have lost their creativity. They can't apply things.
And that's the creativity and the imagination to be able to frickin' just kind of come up with things. And like, I took another guy I met through Bush Plaid. He's in a sniper section, and we were just doing a wash walk over here in the Franklins. I go down. I call it a wash walk. You go down, you kind of loop your way back down one of the washes because it's really hard the areas around the wash to like do anything because they're just sheer rock. And I just what I remember from that was like he said multiple times because we were just talking about he's a sniper section, concealment, OPs, stuff like that. And I remember like 3 or 4 times him saying like, oh wow, I never thought about it like that. And it's like, well, because it wasn't taught to him or it's not doctrine. It's not something. It's not a thought process. And what you said about creativity, it's just like we've created a force of just order, or orders. And if it's not within that, we don't think outside the box. And it's a cliche phrase, blah blah blah. But you have to think outside the box if you want to one up your enemy, in whatever context, in whatever scenario you're practicing your fieldcraft for. Like you've got to be outside your box thinker. Like I don't know. Like I'm weird. Like I grew up doing the bushcraft and fieldcraft stuff. Like I use my fucking toes and my teeth as tools, in like contexts even in today with like gear and rifles and just in general. Like I make my own paracord out of freaking AAI. You can actually use the yucca is actually a pretty durable thing. It's really hard, but you freaking take the yucca, 3 strands, you make your own paracord. 3 strands of yucca, you tie the end of it, you put the knot between your toes, and you just braid it. And you've got your own section of paracord. Right? So, like, who's teaching our infantrymen how to make their own paracord if they don't have it? And in what environment? Yucca for the desert here. Inner pine bark. Do you know that you can make cordage from inner pine bark, but you can also eat inner pine bark? Not for an extended period of time, because it's so fibrous that it does what it does to bears. So bears, when they're getting ready to hibernate, they eat pine bark, pine cones, and pine needles, and it creates that so that they don't for 9 months or 6 months. And so if a human eats too much inner pine bark, it'll constipate him. But
like
in a survival, literally, it's nature's MRE. But you can, in a survival situation, you can utilize pine for almost anything. Pine sap is naturally antiseptic. So if you take pine sap and put it on a cut, and then take some old man's beard, so Spanish moss,
like moss, right?
Witch's hair, old man's beard, that type of moss, and you wrap it around the cut that has the pitch on it. It's nature's Band-Aid and freaking Neosporin. You can literally, pine is one of, because it's so, it has so much sap in it, and the sap is so flammable. Pine is one of the woods that you can chop down and process in one day and burn it in the same day. But who's teaching the guys this? You know what I mean?
Or honey.
What's the fucking phrase? Who's going to carry the boats? Who's going to build the fire? Like, if the guys don't know how to do it, and that's going back to the whole, putting fieldcraft into the conflict setting. I think today, now that GWAT is quote unquote officially done, it's more prevalent than ever, more important. That because, how many of these Russian guys are left out with nothing, and it's because their logistics fell behind them. How do we know that that's not going to happen with our guys? You know, you get some Russian conscripts from inner Moscow who have never spent a day out in the woods, and they're stuck in the woods in the Ukraine, and their rations are expired, and they're done with, their food's done, and there's no water, and they go and they surrender. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have, but,
But
it's,
also that's not even just a strictly military context, but a majority of our listeners, I'm assuming I don't have the analytics for it, aren't active duty or aren't serving in our or whatever military, right? They're civilians, right? And they're preparing for a militant context if they have to pick up arms to defend themselves, their families, their communities, whatever.
right.
So
Whatever
if you're
scenario
preparing
it
for
is.
that, exactly. So if you're preparing for that, like you don't have that infrastructure, you don't have those logistics, so you need to be preparing for this stuff. And you need to be able to pick that up on your own.
And that's the biggest thing, isn't it? It's the logistics of it, because I put that in one of my YouTube videos. I think it's the meet Bush Plaid, which is meet Ian, and it was me just kind of going over my history, but why I'm doing this, because for civilians, not even active military or anything, when it comes down to it, you're practicing this with a group of guys who may be former or never been in the military, but you don't have a massive logistic network behind you. It is you and your little group, whether it's 2, 4, 10, 20 guys. It's just you. You don't have drones. A military industrial complex, drones, the CASEVAC, freaking resupply for anything, resupply for anything, ammunition, food, water, fuel. You have to be self-sufficient on all of that, whether you were in the military or not. And I've found that hillbillies from Tennessee are more reliant than, a staff sergeant from freaking California who's been in the Army for 12 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's
just this year.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all you.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, this last year, even. All right. So last I think it was February, Texas had the freeze. I lost power for 4 days in 3-degree weather with my wife and a 1-year-old in my house. I had everybody go in the living room, set up a tent. I had a fire going for 4 days around the clock, waking up all hours of the night, keeping that thing roaring, cracked the stones all the way up in my fireplace, keeping it going so we didn't freaking freeze to death in 2022.
And that was the Texas freeze.
Yeah, that was the Texas. Well, or I guess it would have been 2021, right?
Yeah, 21. But, 20 February 21. Yeah. That when that happened, that's when we moved across the state of Texas while that storm was happening. When we got here to El Paso, the Home Depot and the Lowe's were sold out of firewood, and I know it's bad to do it, but people from the city don't understand. They sold out all their wood, pressure treated, and their firewood because
everything.
The power was out, and it was as what you just said. It was bad. Like, thank God we were on, because the military housing here at least has its own grid, because they have to keep things up and running. But like, there are people out in town without power for almost 2 weeks, and they were fucking, burning water and melting ice, burning wood and melting ice for water, because a lot of the water mains here froze. And it's like, how do you prepare for that as a civilian?
Well, I was checking on, so I have two elderly neighbors. I had one, 2 elderly neighbors, and they stayed in bed the whole time because they just moved from California. They didn't have anything for cold, so they stayed in bed in some sleeping bags the whole time.
Could you imagine?
Other neighbors, the gentleman had a shoulder surgery, biffed it on the pavement in his driveway. I had to check on him, make sure he was okay. Their dog needed sutures taken out before he got infected. Like, anything could happen. I mean, Six just lived through yet another hurricane in Florida, ripped up his yard, ripped up his state. I mean, this stuff is so close to you. It's so close to you every single day, and people don't think about it. And people are so far removed.
People are so absorbed with their small world around them, like we were saying about how people won't go out of their 30-minute bubble. But people are so removed that what's the meme? It's a picture of a family with a white picket fence, and people are so used to this being their reality. And then the next picture is just some Eastern European soldiers shooting AKs in a rubble building. People are so used to this being reality and then the next picture, this is the actual reality of the world, where things can flip on a dime like this, and people aren't ready for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people aren't.
Well, I think same sort of meme I saw. It was like, this is a blip. This is a freak accident in the time frame of the world. Like if you think about the history of the world, regardless of how old you think it is, let's just condense it to the last 5,000 years. The amount of things that have happened in the last 5,000 years to the amount of things that have happened since 1915 is insane. There's got to be a reason everything's happening right now, whether it's good or bad. Mm-hmm. But there's got to be a reason why everything has happened in the last 100 years. Like the advances in technology in the last 100 years over the history of mankind. There's got to be a reason. Are we gonna like you just said, this is a blip? Are we gonna take that blip and then kind of like keep progressing humanity and society, or is it a blip up and then back down to rubble and freaking warring tribes? Well, have you ever read 1 Second After, or it was 1 Second After. I forget the author. Yeah, so it's a book about if an EMP were to.
Oh yeah, I remember when
that
was a big thing when fucking North Korea finally got their quote unquote nuclear capability. Everybody was like, all North Korea's got to do is send a nuke up over North America and detonate it in the atmosphere, and it'll cause an EMP from freaking mid Canada all the way down to the Panama Canal. And that's scary because in the first 6 months,
it's terrifying.
It's the first 6 months. I'm not going to say half because that's a lot of people. A lot of people are going to die solely because no food, water. How many people go to the hospital once a week for some type of treatment? They're all done.
How many people are on liver, cardiac?
Oh, dude.
Endocrine medications.
First 6 months.
After an EMP went off, think about how many people are in the air.
Oh, that's true. How many people are in in airplanes and traveling and whatnot? Because it's tens of thousands every day.
Trains or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, but all that was the book. That's what the book highlight was. Everybody in airplanes dead. Yeah. Everybody who is, relying on like liver medication or cardiac medication, after they run out, they're dead. Nothing for it, right? Because
in those first 6 months, everybody who is on a medication or freaking think about pregnant mothers. Think about anybody who's pregnant. The infant mortality rate is going to go back to what it was freaking.
Oh my God.
100 years ago, the infant mortality rate, everybody who's going to have a kid, what was the infant mortality rate? More than 50%. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you posted that. I reshared that because that's the kind of shit people need to read and understand.
Appreciate it. Where there is no doctor.
So you want to wrap it up with what's the biggest misconception about Recce?
Yeah, I mean, so in your experience, because you have a lot more, a lot more followers, a lot more interactions than we do. I would assume daily. So what do you find are the biggest misconceptions that people have with Recce or fieldcraft or whatever people call it, just in how they need to get prepared? Like, where are people missing the mark on that?
I think that
I feel like with Recce though, like people are thinking it's force on force. Like they're thinking they're going to be mountain men going through and just like doing like all this like SFs like Navy SEAL stuff in the mountains of Tora Bora. Like it's I'm assuming that's probably what it's going to be is the biggest misconception. It's going to be that.
And that's the your skills over gear is
mm-hmm.
a million times. Everything I practice that I post, the things that I'm practicing for, or not even practicing for, but practicing for scenarios, whatever title you want to give it. All the stuff I practice with my fieldcraft is based off of long range reconnaissance and sustainability, just doing recon. It has nothing to do with direct action. It has nothing to do with force on force. It has to do with, and this is what Recce's, the South African Reconnaissance Commandos, the Recce's, the majority of the stuff that they did in a reconnaissance role was to get in far into like Angola or Mozambique, get in, find out the information they needed to without being seen, and then get out without firing a single fucking shot. That's why they would wear the copy camouflages of what the terrorists, the insurgents would wear, because and then they would black up their faces. They would do it was called Black is Beautiful camouflage paint. Black is Beautiful camouflage cream. And so people, and that's I hate that. I post pictures of that Recce guys in the black camouflage paint, and somebody always has to comment, "Oh, look, it's Justin Trudeau or blackface," and I just delete it because that's the kind of stuff that freaking the algorithm will look at, right? So anyway, so what they would do is they would wear those copy camouflages and they would paint themselves black, because at 100 yards, you look like another African insurgent. And they would just walk past enemy patrols and keep going towards their objective, which was some type of reconnaissance, a dam that they were to recce. So recce is short for reconnaissance / reconnoiter. It's just doing a quick recce. Is they get out, they go and they look at something, right? And it's the whole like recce rifle thing. The misconception is there is no such thing as a fucking recce rifle. The recce's, the South African Recce's, the Zulu Scouts, these guys who were in 2-man reconnaissance teams, went and did that job with an AK, iron sights, with 6 mags. They didn't have a suppressor and an LPVO and a light and a laser or anything like that.
That's not the point.
There's your misconception. That's your misconception. That the Recce rifle is anything other than a name moniker. It has nothing to do with, because true reconnaissance, and that's what I practice, and that's why a lot of the time when I go out, I'm not going out and I'm not shooting. I'm going for a kit hike, a kit ruck, a wash walk. I'm going to do those things in the practice of not being seen, gathering intelligence, reconnoitering an area, whether the enemy's there or not, and not firing a shot. You know how many times I go out and I don't shoot my gun? And I'm like, I haven't shot my gun in like 4 months. I need to go to the range, check my zero, because I beat my rifle, my main rifle. I beat that up more just going out and doing stuff than I do like actually shooting it, you know? And that kind of piggybacks off those memes I make of making fun of, you know, it's more important to know how to make a shelter and a fire than your freaking split times, you know, and your freaking draw times, because 20 years of GWAT. There's a misconception. It isn't a Recce misconception, but it's just a misconception that 20 years of GWAT, everybody thinks that how fast you move and shoot is important. To me, how far you can move and how long you can stay there is more important than anything. Because, you know, you get a guy with eyes on target that can sit in an OP and be self-sustaining for weeks at a time. What's his name? There was a Zulu scout from Rhodesia. His name's Chris Schulenberg. He left when Rhodesia fell in 80. He went to South Africa and joined the Recce's in South Africa. But when he was in the Zulu Scouts, he was on the Zulu Scout Recce troop, and they specialized in 2-man reconnaissance patrols. So you had a black Native African soldier and a white European descended soldier who would wear the camouflage and the black paint. And these 2 guys would go into Zambia or Mozambique for weeks at a time, just the 2 of them, to conduct reconnaissance by themselves. They'd carry 90 pounds worth of gear with a high frequency radio, food. The Rhodesian SAS would get resupplied every 14 days. These Zulu small teams would go in and they'd bring stuff in for 4 or 6 weeks. Just 2 guys.
Jesus.
So Chris Schulenberg, he holds, and it's not even like a real record, but from all the reading and the veterans I've talked with, he holds the record for the world's longest 1-man reconnaissance. He went into Mozambique for 7 weeks on his own.
Goodness.
He was behind
Wow.
behind enemy lines. He was on his own in Mozambique for 7 weeks doing reconnaissance on bridges and roads by himself. Now, tell me what kind of imagination and ingenuity that motherfucker had to make it 7 weeks on right. So that's that misconception. People think that they're tricked out rifle and they're freaking pack with a sleeping pad on it, and potentially, I'm not judging, I'm not saying, but potentially unnecessary gear for a long range recce bullshit is not reality. Now, who am I to question their reality? I'm just me. I'm just saying, from a third person looking at them, a lot of guys don't focus on the proper things. Like here in the Southwest, I coming from New England, I never had more than 2 or 3 canteens on me. Here, the most I've ever carried is 3.5 gallons. That's almost 30 pounds of water. Just in the kit. That was, you see this funny thing. I'll throw this out there because people keep bringing it up and trying to make fun of me for it. In August, I went up to the Oregons. The weather was supposed to be 95, partly cloudy with a breeze. It ended up being 102, sun, no breeze. I made it about 3/4 of a mile to the area, towards the area where my goal was to get to this area, set up an OP area. I had an empty day pack I had rolled up on my main pack that was with the 3.5 gallons of water. I got 3/4 of a mile in, and it was 100. I couldn't stop sweating, and I didn't know it was going to be that hot. I had all that gear on, and everywhere I stopped to put my shit down, there were fire ants or small ants in the area where I wanted to make my OP. So I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm supposed to be doing this for fun. This is me. So I was by myself. I'm supposed to be setting up a OP by myself, observing this campground and this road just as practice. I'm going to spend the night out. I brought a small tent. I wasn't going to lay out, I had 70 pounds worth of gear with 30 pounds of water, so I had everything, right? And I got there, I couldn't stop sweating. I wasn't replenishing my electrolytes and my sodium fast enough, and the ants were all over. People making fun of, can't take a bunch of ants. Well, you come out here this August, and we'll go up to the Oregons, and I'll show you that even if I made a place and set up my tent, they're the small fire ants. They're going to crawl through the fucking zipper, or they're going to be all over my. Because I put my rig down and my rifle down to go kind of look, can I find a place with shade with no ants? By the time I came back, everything was covered in little ants. That's not fun. It's part of this training thing too. Is it's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to enjoy learning and training. And I was like, I'm done. I'm gone. And it was a very long 3/4 of a mile back to my van with all that gear and stuff. Halfway back, I was like, I'm going back to the car. What the fuck am I carrying 3 gallons of water for? And I just dumped 2.5 gallons of it because I was like, knowing my luck, I'm going to fall over and break my ankle, and I'm going to need some water, right? And so I got back to my car, and I didn't even own up. I didn't even own it. I just made a post with a preface at the beginning with, yet again, another in-your-face lesson about dehydration in the Southwest. And people just took it as this fat retard, Rhodesian LARPer couldn't handle a night out in the woods. And that's just the I'll throw it out there. I'll throw names out there because I just, talking with my buddies, I don't give Coniferous Origins, that guy, he had said some stuff a while back, but this most recent stuff that he said, when I made that meme about keeping religion and politics out of your fucking training and your your craft, and it just upsets these Catholic boys. They get so upset about it, and he made it was legitimately directed at me, personal attack, and I was like, you motherfucker, I'm gonna call you out, and I did. I called him out in my story, and I had probably, not kidding, 50 DMs from people being like, "F that guy, those those guys, like, you know, and it's just, I don't, the phrase keyboard warriors is just kind of overused, but it's just like, I feel like half these people that say stuff to you on social media in person wouldn't say a fucking word. You know, because you're hiding behind. Look, I was anonymous on Rhodey's Plaid for the first 9 months, but I was more worried about because of Rhodesia and that kind of thing things that are synonymous with it. I was anonymous, and then I finally was like, "What the fuck am I hiding?" You know, because at that point I was like sharing more about history and guns and stuff at that period of time with the Rhodey's Plaid, and I changed. I got rid of my anonymity, and you know, these guys who still run these pages, like Coniferous Origins, who blurs their face out like they're some tier 1 operator, and they don't want people to know them. Dude, if you're blurring it out because you don't want freaking Instagram to know who you are, you're an idiot. Because they know what you look like. When you open up the gallery on your phone on Instagram, and it has access to all your photos, Instagram has all your photos. They can look at all your photos on your phone, including those pics. Like it's not a freaking it's not. You laugh. Doth thou thinkest thy jest? I don't. They know what you look like. The whole anonymity thing is just trying to be cool. And at this day and age, GWAT's done. It's not cool. Chill out. We get it. You were a reservist in the Marine Corps. You were a commo guy. You think nods make you a god. But it doesn't. And there's your misconception with the recce thing, is skills over gear. Guys think that they drop $3,000 on a pair of fucking nods and it gives them a superpower and it makes them a god. It doesn't. It's just an extra cool piece of kit. And I said this on the podcast with the first response fieldcraft guys, and I'll say this with the nod thing. John Stryker Myers, who was in the RT Idaho in Vietnam, he was a SOG guy. At night, what did they do? They stopped and they sat down and they didn't move until first light. Because when you're in an enemy area, when you're in a am I going to use this phrase right? A non-permissive environment, the last thing you need to do is bumble around in the dark, whether you have nods or not, because the enemy, that's their home turf. And they'll know every which way that you're going to go or that they're going to come at you. So what did the RT guys do? They just sat down in a depending on what was behind them, in a semicircle or in a circle, with their back against a tree, with their rifle facing out, and they just sat there till first light, and then they continued on the mission. And now I have nods. They're NVG7s. They're old school. They're 2-to-1, but they're better than nothing. But in this environment, I haven't been in a single environment here in the Southwest where I'd like want to go for a walk, not on a trail, because there are so many dips and washes and cactuses. Your white phosphorus dual tubes aren't going to show you that tiny little cactus that's going to poke you in the leg and make you scream like a girl and give the position away. So skills over gear. People need to focus on their individual skills, like what we said earlier, and like what I harp on: fire making, water purification, shelter making. You need to be proficient in that before you worry about dropping thousands of dollars on a item, whatever it is, whether it's a rifle or an optic or nods. But gear don't maketh man, skills maketh man. From the movie Man is maketh man. It's the skills maketh man. Gear doesn't make a man. And it's sad that you've got guys who think that owning a specific piece of kit is going to give you an advantage on the battlefield, potentially. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where that whole nods debate came from. I think it's a lot of these debates, I think, are just, and this isn't satirical. This isn't, I'm not making fun, but I think it just pops into somebody's fucking head and they go with it. And because it's their idea, they just kind of roll with it. And like they can't backtrack on their own idea. Does that make sense? Like they have loyalty to their own idea. Like Jesus, God, nods make me a god, and they post it, and then people start bashing. It's like, well, I thought about it. It's my idea. I can't kind of like backpedal on it because I'd be
Well, it's
backpedaling
like,
on myself.
if you don't have nods, you're a non-combatant.
Don't.
It's just,
Don't. Yes,
It's
let me
silly.
go. Let me go sew your pants
silly.
and make you dinner. Like, bro.
But
That
but what you're saying though, the only reason this can be a debate, this can be, people can be shouting this out from the other side of the internet, is because we live in such a cush life right now.
No, that's it. That really
Our life is so easy. If you actually had to worry about half the stuff, it wouldn't even enter your brain. It would not.
No.
Because it is so far removed from reality.
Yeah.
I guarantee those guys, if they ever got into a force on first conflict and they had their nods, they would get clapped. Because, I mean, if their land navigation specialist learned land navigation from Arma, no. For one, you are not the end-all, be-all.
You are not him.
Any of these things.
You are not him.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The only thing that's going to happen to those guys if they think they're going to be warlords is they're going to go into their first engagement and get clapped and lose their nods.
Exactly.
But that's the thing too, and that's why I hate the whole warlord, fantasy as well. If
it's
all
ego.
you have to bring to the table is the fact that you're a fighting age male,
with
you're
a
not
single
useful,
piece of gear.
Yeah, if all you have is hey, I can fight, you're not useful, man. Hate to tell you.
Well,
but there's a lot of fighting age males around here.
It's true.
It's so
literally
bad.
Skills over gear.
Every time.
God.
Always.
It's bad enough when you see those. Go ahead, man. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, because that's the thing. Skills over gear always. If you want if you want an example, have you against some Joe Schmo kid out of college who doesn't know crap, right? Hand each of you a rifle. Right? Who's more proficient? Okay, hand each of you a pack, or whatever, right? But even take my rifle away, give it to the kid, I'm still more effective than that kid,
right?
Yep,
because I've invested in this skill set.
Exactly.
And in my head, I know the ramifications of this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. 100%.
It's just it's just the consumer, the consumer.
That's what it is,
and it's going to kill so many people.
And I mean, that's another rabbit hole with consumerism in this. I hate the phrase industry, but it's just it's not. You know what? It's not even really worth shedding light on, or the time of day, because everybody has their own opinion on this. I hate the phrase industry. Just guns, gear,
community,
military. Sure, but
community.
it's just,
We'll call it. It's the easy way of doing it. I know what you mean.
But it's just kind of it's just, yeah, it's just people think spending a lot of money means that they've gained something, when in reality, if you don't have you don't know how to apply it properly, it's worthless. $3,000 rifle is worthless if you don't actually know how to shoot. And but what I mean by that is shooting fast in your draw times doesn't mean you know how to shoot. I'm talking about actual marksmanship. And applicable shooting, reactive shooting as well. It's not always going to be the 25. You're going to need my rangers on the 25-yard line. It isn't always the 25-yard line. But
what about manual of arms maintenance? I mean,
yeah,
weapons familiarization, something we touched on way early in the podcast. But say you don't have an AR-15 at your disposal,
right?
You know what I mean? Can you pick up an AK powered rifle and use it?
I did a right before my buddy, when he went to Korea, right after the war in Ukraine kicked off. I did a Eastern European camouflage and weapons familiarization class with him for his platoon, and I said,
awesome.
I said to the platoon, how many of you have ever handled the AK platform? 2 of them raised their hands. And this is a platoon of infantrymen in the army. How many of you ever handled an AK? I said not shoot, but just handled an AK, a Kalashnikov. 2 of them raised their hand. There's your weapons familiarization. And that's why
I don't think we had any.
Huh?
I don't think we had any when we deployed to Afghanistan.
It's insane. Because
We had
it's
two
the
guys in our
second most
platoon.
prevalent intermediate cartridge rifle in the. I don't want to use assault weapon. The intermediate cartridge rifle in the United States. It goes AR, AK. Like, it's not that rare.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to find somebody with an AK. But
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
the big question is, what's the third?
what's the third? Honestly, I wouldn't. The SKS. You know how many bubbas got an SKS thinking they can run it fast because they got that quick detached 30-round Tapco magazine, the Clipperzine.
What about the
Oh
foul?
my God.
You know, the thing with the FAL is that 7.62 is just, it's expensive, so it's so hard to feed a FAL unless you have a lot of money. You know what I mean? Because like you go to the range and you go through 100 rounds, that's well over $100 just for those 100 rounds. You know what I mean? And the problem with the FAL is there's so many mixed matched metric and inch pattern rifles and magazines that like when you talk about parts compatibility, it really isn't the same as like the AR or the AK, because the FAL is just, there are so many different models and variants of it, and a lot of the things don't go together.
Right.
Plus it's technically a battle rifle because it's 7.62. Like what is it? The FAL, the Scar Heavy, and the M14, and what's the other battle rifle?
Galil?
There's a Galil Heavy, right? The 7.62 Galil, which I mean, yeah, I guess that technically makes it a freaking battle rifle in 7.62. But I digress.
What are you doing?
Talk about expensive cartridges. 300 Blackout,
Oh God.
6.5 Grendel.
Oh God. That is an intermittent cartridge.
Good
I don't
Lord.
know why you do it to yourself.
I cringe every time I go to the range. I do.
Just be a man. Get a grand.
Dude, I would if they weren't like $5 grand.
Yeah, they've gone up in the last couple of years.
It's dumb.
And 30-06 is expensive to feed something. Like if you really want to have fun with like the H car, you imagine owning an H car, like a box of ammo, 20 rounds is like $30-something.
Yeah, no thanks.
Well, I think that's all the points we really had time for tonight. But thanks a lot for coming on the show, man.
Of course,
It
dude.
was a lot of fun, and you're a wealth of knowledge. We'd love to have you on again. But
Hey, look, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm free. I'm free whenever you guys are free.
all right, well, we'll definitely let you know. It's just I really believe people need more of this. People just need no nonsense conversations on, really taking a step back and a more down to earth perspective of quit worrying about, what kind of camo you're wearing. Can you start a fire? Can you find water?
Right.
Before you have to worry about purifying it.
Exactly.
And especially I'd love to talk about, excuse me, I'd love to talk about more, figuring out training as a family man, as a father and a husband,
Yeah.
And what that means for you and your family, which we didn't really have time for tonight, but,
Yeah.
just really appreciate your perspective and, taking your time
Absolutely.
to come on the show.
Of course, guys.
So where can people find you in your content?
So it's at Bush Plaid on Instagram, and it's Plaid's channel on YouTube. And I had the Plaid's channel. I kept it Plaid because I didn't want to say Rhodey's Plaid channel because I knew one day I'd get the Zuck. So Bush Plaid
Get nuked.
and Plaid's channel.
It's unfortunate.
And yeah, that's it. I'm not on Facebook, and I don't have a Tic Tac or whatever the kids call it these days.
The Tic Tac.
The Tic Tac.
I really
Well,
appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, thanks for
Man,
coming
it's been
on.
great talking to you.
And of course, we're Hard Times Strongmen. You find us on Instagram at Hard Times Strongmen Podcast, or you can email us at htsmpodcast@gmail.com. We're the Hard Times Strongmen Podcast, making a better class of man. So thanks for coming on, man. Really appreciate you.
Thank you, guys.